This is Dateline News and Conversation. Only one topic tonight with three of my good friends. They've all been on the show before. Hendrik Weber, Maria Nikalokaki, and Blaz Kavcic. And we are going to discuss Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin, which I just learned a few minutes ago has reached 191 million views. That in itself is historic. So tonight, we're going to talk about and do our own analysis on a number of things. Number one, we'll talk a little bit about Tucker Carlson. I'm going to ask them what their views of Tucker are or have been. And number two, how they think he conducted the interview. And so without any further delay, we're going to go to Hendrik. Hendrik, you're sitting there in Norway. I wonder, I know you saw it. You probably have read some of the transcript. How do you perceive Tucker Carlson as a person? You consider him a journalist? Do you consider him a traitor to the United States? This is what he's being accused of. People want to lock him up. People in Europe want to sanction him. So the first part, how do you see him as a person? And number two, how do you think he conducted the interview? Hendrik, take it away.
Yes, no, of course, Tucker Carlson is absolutely a journalist. He has worked in this business many years. He was well known in Fox News. And of course, now he is independent and he's doing the same job. So absolutely, he is a journalist. Nevertheless, when it comes to journalists with so much influence, I'm always a little bit critical because you can be corrupt or the power you have can make you corrupt. So I'm always a little bit skeptical if you have so much influence, so much followers. But in this interview, he has done a great job. He has used his opportunity to get this interview with Vladimir Putin. And of course, from the Kremlin side, it was also smart to give him this interview. I think he has done a great job in this interview. Of course, he is accused not to be too soft and to give the Kremlin or Russia this microphone for their propaganda. But I think the interview was great and he has done a good job. So it was very important to see, I think.
Okay, that's interesting. Maria, what are your thoughts? Your microphone.
Sorry about that. Of course, Tucker Carlson has been one of the most influential journalists in recent times. When he left Fox, Fox dropped its shares like 15%. And he also had a huge fan club with millions of people following him. So it's really, he's one of the most significant journalists in USA right now, within a channel or without a channel. But what we need to see with Tucker Carlson is that he's from the conservative side, he's with Trump, and they together support a line that we should collaborate with Russia to fight China. Russia is white, they are Christian, they are capitalist, so we should collaborate with them and not attack them, because the neocons' plan was one by one the least strong before China countries like Syria, Iran, Russia, and then finally China were to be demolished like one by one, like a domino. That didn't work out. It was it obviously was a disaster for the West to be under this plan. So this is like another way to approach how to fight China, which is the ultimate enemy at the end. And you can some part of the American establishment is trying to do is to forge a unity with Russia to fight against China. And there was a very critical question there, I think, where he said, he asked Putin straight away, did you, what do you think about China? Do you think that it would be the hegemon of the BRICS and that it would create problems? And Putin answered to him straight away that, you in the West always search for boogeyman, and China has never imposed its will on us. It's always been in collaboration, and we don't choose our neighbors. This is what China will always be our neighbor, so we work with China. So I think this is a very crucial point to have in mind when we read and see this interview. It's also part of an approach to use Russia against China. And don't forget that when China came into the West, it was it was an invitation by Kissinger and Nixon saying that China should, the West should collaborate with China to fight the USSR. So they are trying to manipulate power states.
All right. So how do you think Tucker handled the interview, Maria?
I think he was very eloquent, but at the same time he had Putin to deal with. So the power of Putin, the body language between those two, was very obvious that he was intimidated. And of course, Putin was a strong man. He was very confident. He knew what he was talking about. He gave a lecture about the history of the Russian people from the 8th century onwards, which was astonishing, actually. And I open here a parenthesis. At the same time, you see Biden not remembering if it's the president of Mexico or Argentina. It's like the complete opposite. And so I think the body language and the whole interviewing was that it's way out of his league to control. Tucker tried to control the conversation once or twice, but it was always Putin that was giving the tone of the discussion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I paid a lot of attention to the body language as well. And you mentioned that Tucker really was out of his element, and he knew it and he felt it. He wasn't just interviewing some politician, or even if he's interviewed Joe Biden, I don't know, but he realized he was in the presence of a vastly more superior intellect than I think he's ever encountered.
Exactly.
And to me, he looked even stiff at many points. When the camera switched over to him, he was paying close attention, but he was really stiff. He was not relaxed. Meanwhile, Putin was laying back and he's very relaxed and very confident. So I think that's a good point you make. Blaz, your thoughts. Tucker Carlson, first of all, do you think he's a legitimate journalist? Number two, how do you think he conducted the interview?
Okay, so we are discussing here maybe the most watched interview of all times. It's very important. We are in in very critical times for the planet, for humanity. But this is not the first interview of this kind. I would just like to remind us all on Oliver Stone's interview, which was very systemic, very detailed years ago. So I hope that this was not the first one, that this was a very important one, and I hope that similar interviews will happen in the future by Tucker or by other journalists. Now, about Tucker, a few short words I would not like to repeat because a lot was said, and I agree with that. I would maybe add that he evolved, Tucker Carlson evolved as a news professional. He even confessed some of his wrong positions, like Iraq war from the past. To me, he comes through as a normal, good person and speaks more common sense than most of other influencers. Now, the question, it was already a little bit touched. Is he organic? Is he self-made? Of course not, because nobody can get and keep audience of his size by accident, by just being good, being honest, unbiased. He comes from a networked family. So he should also be taken with sound degree of skepticism. I think he conducted the interview very professionally, in a language and attitude which was very acceptable for a broad spectrum of audience. A very important question by Tucker, and I didn't see this question analyzed so far, is the question of decision making. Who is really making decisions in the world today? This question is seldom asked by the media, and this interview only partially answered to some aspects of it. President Putin handled the interview in a cooperative way, I think, but maybe I will then explain what I thought about the content and the President Putin's cooperation in the interview later. So this would be what I have to say about Tucker Carlson and his conducting the interview.
Yeah. Well, I was never a fan of Tucker Carlson when he was on Fox. I mean, I never watched that. If maybe somebody sent me a link and said, you have to see this, I may have watched. But since he left Fox, got fired and left, and then started his own network, really, his following has increased tremendously. I mean, he's got millions of people that watch him, that are following him now. And I think one of the things that, and I've only seen a few of his interviews, but I have made this assessment, and I have other people that I'm in contact with who feel the same way. They feel that Tucker now, as Blaz said, has admitted some of his errors, the Iraq war, for example, and there are others, that he took that Fox News conservative position, but he's changed. And I think Tucker Carlson now, in my opinion, has had somewhat of an awakening that there's a lot that he doesn't know. A lot that he doesn't know from the other side of the political spectrum or the ideological spectrum. And my feeling is that he came to Russia not really knowing what he was going to get. I think he thought it's going to be another interview and he's going to control it. But it was almost obvious immediately that Putin was the one controlling this. The other comment that was made is he's got this vast audience, and Blaz mentioned the Oliver Stone interviews. And I watched those interviews several times. I know Oliver Stone because he agreed to be in my first film, The Ghost of Jeju, and he has a small cameo role towards the end of the film. But since that time, we've been in touch with each other. And because of that film, Oliver went to South Korea and participated in the same protest against the construction of a naval base there. Well, here's where I want to go with this. I've been able to stay in touch with Oliver, and he's answered my emails every single time. Sometimes it might take 2 or 3 days, but he's always answered. And I said to him, I asked him after the interviews, I said, Oliver, this was incredible. And, I hope that millions and millions of people will watch it. And you know what he said to me? He says, nobody's listening. And what happened to him is he really got crucified in the press. People turned against him. He couldn't raise money in America for his films. And he's produced several since then. He had to go overseas to raise money. Now, the reason I bring this up is because Oliver Stone spent 6 different times with Putin. He got to know this man better than anybody else. Oliver Stone has interviewed presidents and prime ministers from Latin America, Central America, from foreign governments as well. He's very comfortable in that environment. The difference today, and we've started to talk about that, Tucker has an enormous audience. Because of this conflict between USA and Russia, this is a number one issue. I mean, it's being raised in the United States Congress right now. They don't want to send more money to Ukraine. American people are aware of what's going on. And so I think Tucker has had this tremendous success, not because he's better, but because of the timeliness of this particular moment in history, and the fact that when he came to Russia, he told people ahead of time, I'm coming here because the American people have been lied to, and I want to give President Putin the opportunity to tell the other side in his story. And I think that's probably the main reason why this interview has got 190 million views and rising. People everywhere are talking about it. They're talking about it literally around the globe, and people have looked at it differently, obviously. And I think one of the things that was really interesting, and it showed Putin's humor, when Tucker tried to move ahead and control the interview, he said, well, wait a minute, is this a talk show or a serious discussion? And I thought, wow. And Tucker laughed, and he knew he got needled. He knew that Putin had really given it to him, and I think changed, I don't want to say change the whole tone, but maybe change Tucker's attitude about don't play games with me, don't kind of trick me, don't kind of trap me. And from then on, I thought he did a really good job. Let's dig a little bit deeper now. Hendrik, I want to come to you. There were so many different topics, points of interest in this 2-hour, I want to call it marathon interview, unique, one of its kind. Blaz said maybe historic. What for you, Hendrik, stood out the most?
That's a little bit difficult to say because we are called propagandists for Kremlin. At least I'm in Norway. So there was nothing for me that was completely new. And I think people who are interested in Russia, who have interests in alternative media, all these people know already a lot of these topics Putin talked about. But of course, it is really important to let him speak in 2 hours so that you can get a sense of what he's meaning, what his ideas are, and what he is thinking on. If it would be another media outlet, mainstream media outlet who have done this interview, they would pick out some sentences here and some sentences there, but you'd never heard 2 hours talk with Vladimir Putin, where he can think through all his thoughts and explain them. So that's why this interview was really important, I think. When it comes to Putin's attitude, of course, he's an absolute diplomat. He has a lot of knowledge. He don't have to read anything from some kind of paper. Everything is in his head. Outstanding person when it comes to knowledge, numbers, and dates. He knows everything already, and I think this is the kind he is. It's not prepared before the interview, I think, and I also don't think that Tucker has to deliver all the questions in detail before. Maybe they have talked about some topics or sent some emails backwards, forwards about the topics they will talk about, but Putin don't need all the questions before, because he has this knowledge. He can explain things. He's very diplomatic. So for me, this was the most interesting to see how much knowledge he has and how good he is to explain the things going on in the world, not only in Russia, but all the different connections between CIA, between the states, who has done this, who has done that. All these kind of things is, I think, very interesting, at least for me, to hear from him directly.
You said something very interesting. I asked you, what do you think stood out? And I thought you would probably start talking about one or another of the topics, but you mentioned something more important. And I was going to get that to a little bit later, but you talked about Putin and how he came across. All of you know how he has been characterized in the United States as somebody worse than Hitler, Attila the Hun, the worst than Mussolini, worse than any banana republic dictator. He's been talked about as a crazed maniac. He has this vengeance to want to blow up the world and conquer the world. All that garbage that they fed us during the Soviet era with the communist ideology. But Hendrik, I'll ask you this. Do you think anybody in the United States, and I know you're not there, but do you think anybody with an open mind in the United States, and I have to think most of those 191 million were probably from the United States, or a big majority, do you think anybody, after seeing what you just described, the consummate statesman, encyclopedia memory, without notes, without a teleprompter, without somebody whispering into his ear, relaxed, calm, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't giving this stuff, none of this. How do you think an American, any open-minded American, could still consider Putin what they've been taught about him?
It's difficult to see, because I'm not sure. The people who are interested, who have a little bit open mind, will of course see this interview, and then you can make your own decision. You agree with all points, or only with some, or at least you start thinking a little bit. But people who are completely against, who are completely on the mainstream media side, maybe they will see this interview at all, because they say, oh, no, this is only propaganda, we don't have to see it. So that's why it's difficult to say, I think.
All right, let me put this little teaser out there for all of you. I have a couple of friends, well, many friends in America, and many of them are not friends of mine anymore because I live in Russia. I came here and I'm pro-Russian. But one of them in particular said, I was really, really glad to see that interview. I knew a lot about the history that he talked about, but I did not expect the rest of what I saw and heard. And my son, who's former military, former Green Beret, intelligence officer, who they taught him Russian, so he's had this real interest in Russia. I said, well, what did you think? He said, it was fantastic. And I went, wow. And I said, well, what are other people saying? He said, most of my friends thought it was great. Now, his friends are former military guys. His friends are conservative people like he is. He didn't end up like his father being a radical, crazy man. But I think that, to me, that was an indication just from two people, my son and from a very close friend who thinks that, I went off the edge with all this Russia stuff, at least looked at Putin and realized that this man was somebody special. Maria, I'm going to throw it over to you now. The caricature of Putin, do you think maybe it could have created a crack in the American view of President Putin after watching that? At least the ones who watched it.
I think that those who are open enough to watch it, as Hendrik said, would have an impact on them. On the other hand, though, we must see how the whole establishment reacted. And Hillary Clinton was very obnoxious about it, and she said he's a useful fool, and all the TV commentators said he's dangerous for our democracy. And so I think there was some publishments about EU sanctioning him. So I think that, as you said about Oliver Stone, I think that there might be some repercussions on him for going against what the globalists want. And I think that it did though influence the possibility of a peace process starting with Russia, because after all, as Putin eloquently and brilliantly described it, it is a civil war. These are Slavs that are fighting each other. And he said it at the end with a very masterful way, that whatever they do, because it is the same nation, at some point they will join together. And he said, why are they trying to divide the churches? Because the churches are about the soul, and we have the same soul, so they won't be able to break us. So I think that it's an historical, of course, interview. It will go in the books of history. Oliver Stone too had done a very good job, and that was also in the Cold War era, a new Cold War era against Russia and against Putin. What they vilify is the fact that Putin is a patriot. He loves his country. He knows that the West has always thought of dividing Russia, of controlling Russia, controlling its sources. Let's not forget that Russia has about 20% of global resources. It is the biggest country on the planet. It is 6 times as big as the European Union. So it's a very big country, many resources, and of course everyone wants to conquer it. And till now, it is Putin the last who had to defend his country. Now, whatever else they say, they call him whatever, Hitler, Mussolini, or whatever, but that he's not the only one that they called like that. I mean, if you any country they want to attack and invade, they always call them these names. It was Gaddafi, it was Assad, it was everyone who is standing in their way is a Hitler and a Mussolini. So
And
I think
let's
they
not
don't work anymore, I think.
Yeah, let's not forget Saddam Hussein.
Saddam, of course.
Yeah, it's terrific what you mentioned, because that's what they do. Anybody they don't like, they turn into a monster. And Putin has become, you mentioned in the very beginning, the big boogeyman. America and the Western media, Putin is Russia personified.
Exactly.
And so they figured everybody in Russia is this evil place. I'm going to come over to Blush now. We're talking about how the United States especially has characterized Vladimir Putin. And my question was, and I also wanted to mention this, by the way, Donald Trump got somewhere around 80 million votes in the 2016 election, which I believe was stolen. They rigged the election and they gave it to Bush. They flipped votes, the whole thing. 80 million people. We're talking now 191 million people have seen this interview. And you know what? You got to believe that every single person, Maria made the connection with conservative Tucker, conservative Donald Trump. Every one of those 80 million people in America, I can guarantee you watched that interview. Now, Blush, do you think that changed the minds of American people when they saw this man, consummate statesman, calm, relaxed, funny, just everything in his head? And by the way, the questions were not made known to Putin ahead of time, according to what I've read. What do you think? Could this interview, this presentation of Putin, and it was primarily to the American people, do you think it could change the minds of a lot of people about Putin and Russia?
Well, I can only share hope, as Hendrik and Maria already said. It was not much new for us who follow situation in the world, in Russia, in Europe, and who also have objective view of the personalities involved. And we are not typical customers of this information. So I can only share hopes with you that broader American public will now come to realize that we are dealing that the Russians are people as Americans, and the president of Russia is constitutionally elected person with full competences of a president. And let me maybe just add my assessment of how he operated. I think Putin handled this interview in a very cooperative way. He was well prepared, not prepared in a way which Hendrik hinted would not be okay, meaning that it would be a scripted interview. I think it was open. But Putin is always prepared. I don't watch him and follow him systematically, but every now and then, and he is always in a position to respond directly to the people, to the citizens of Russia, or to other statesmen from other countries. So this is how the statesmen should be in this regard. So I hope this will have a positive impact on the citizens of United States. And yes, Putin showed some distance towards the pervasive sensationalistic soundbite style of journalism, and I think it was okay. And I think also that Tucker Carlson understood what it is all about, and that we got a very a good exchange of views, and I will present my views on the content later on.
Okay, wonderful. Now I want to
maybe let me maybe see one short thought. The people who have seen this interview, if they like Putin or what he is saying or not, but in our mainstream media we hear since 1 year or 2 years already that Putin is ill, Putin has cancer, he is an idiot, and he has no knowledge, and he's only evil.
And it's not him. It's not him. It's a double.
Right. True. So even if you don't like him at all, and you have complete other perspectives, but you see that this is a very healthy, very smart, very diplomatic, and very kind person, at least. So that
maybe if I may, so to wrap up this part of our discussion, one very important thing that Putin initially said, and I would not like to come to this one again later on, is that he explained with concrete examples how the highest politicians of United States and others are not actually pulling the strings, are not actually decision makers. So I think it was very important statement. Now, of course, this question is a global one. How is the situation in the states around the world? So this is a systemic question. I'm commenting it because we should not concentrate too much on the personalities. They are all acting, just, let's say, criticizing Putin and so on is wrong way to go, or criticizing too much Biden, which is maybe a better example. Of course, it's clear he's out of his competencies, but now focusing only on his personal gifts and mistakes and so on, it takes concentration away from a systemic problem, which is that we live in a political system globally which puts up basically only politicians who are acting as actors. From Zelensky, we had in Slovenia one actor before, there was Reagan, and there is many other players around. And of course, we would like to see statesmen, but we would also like to see a different system of decision-making, which I think it was very, very correct that Putin brought this out, and this point should be further elaborated.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I really think that was, and I think primarily his audience for most of this, but certainly that statement was directed at the American people. Because if they look at Joe Biden now, anybody, I don't care if you're this rabid Democrat that's going to always vote Democrat and vote blue, they have to know this man is not in charge. I mean, look who is speaking for him, for foreign policy, domestic policy. It isn't him. They give him a few clips because they don't want him talking too much. But they print him out there with a couple of bullet points. But it's John Kirby, Jake Sullivan. It's Victoria Nuland, for goodness sakes. These are all lower level people, State Department, General Austin from the Defense Department, who are making major policy statements. So, Blaz, this is an incredibly important point that you mentioned. Before we move on.
May I add something on this too?
Of course you can.
Thank you. I was also thinking that that's why they got Biden elected, because he was too weak to resist the takeover of the presidency by the neocons. The neocons are running the government for the deep state. And if you want to actually describe what the deep state is, it's also, he mentioned many times about Bush. Now, Bush comes from his grandfather was a collaborator of the Nazis. And we know the Operation Paperclip, how they brought the Nazis into USA. And actually, we must understand that there is CIA is run by Nazis. That's the deep state. So we must, we need to understand where all this is coming from and why we are here, because the whole political arrangement from the beginning, as you said, of course, it was obvious that Biden didn't win. Anyone who was following, I was all night long trying to see how it was going, and I saw that they stopped counting for some hours, and then they came up with another number, and then they brought the envelopes with the votes, and I mean, it was just a charade. That's not, and they say this is democracy. If that is democracy, which it's not even democracy, representative democracy is just a way of the ruling class to reign with your consent. But if we want to really make sense of this all, we must see why US is in this dire condition, and it's not US only, because US and the neocons are able and capable of bringing the whole world down, bringing the World War III, destroying the planet, destroying our lifestyle. So it's much more serious as it goes.
Yeah, well, you just you put a couple of exclamation points behind what Blaz just said. It's systemic. It's not the individual person. Maria, you dug down deep. In fact, Putin also referred to who was in charge: the deep state, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, financiers. He made that really clear. But before we move on, I mean, I want to ask each of you, to the extent that you can and are willing, I've been asking, well, how do you think Americans are going to react? I want to know how your countrymen and women have been reacting, to the extent you can, because your mainstream media has been silent on it too, or if they've done anything, they've cherry-picked certain things to make Putin look bad. Hendrik, how do you think people in Norway and in your motherland, Germany, have you been getting any feedback from anywhere how they have been reacting to this speech?
Yes, of course. On one hand, I, of course, read the newspapers, and all the mainstream media newspapers write about this interview, that this was a propaganda from the Kremlin all the time. Tucker Carlson has not done a good interview. He is not a journalist. He is more like an activist. He is paid by the Kremlin and blah, blah, blah. We all know this history. So that's what I said before. The problem I see is that we are living in the divided world already, complete divided. There are two different sides, and these sides cannot connect anymore. It was by the pandemic. We now see it in the Ukraine war, and also with this kind of interview. On one side, you are for alternative media, and then you are for Tucker Carlson, and you are interested in what Putin says. On the other side, you don't want to hear anything about it, because from your newspaper, you have heard everything is only propaganda. And that is really a problem. So our newspapers write about it, about this interview, of course, only in a negative way. They have all kind of experts who say this and that, and yes, Tucker is not a real journalist because the questions was all too easy, and he did not interrupt Putin, and blah blah blah. and Putin has 2 hours time to come with his propaganda. So it's very dangerous and very wrong from Tucker Carlson to do this. And this interview should be banned by YouTube, and so on and so on. On the other side, you have people who are a little bit interested, maybe not pro-Russian or something, but they are conservative. They are asking questions about our kind of government, our country. And these persons, of course, or people, are very interested in this kind of interview. And there you see a person like Putin, who is very calm, very diplomatic, friendly, in a quiet way. And of course, it makes some kind of impression on you. So, but I think the problem is that we are living already in a kind of divided world. There are no connections between these who are hating Putin and these who love him. So it's difficult.
Okay, Maria, come over to you. How do you think people in Greece, now, three of you have pointed it out. It's obvious the three of us are very much alike. We're very different than the ordinary person in Europe or in America. We've been following these events, and we've been analyzing the kinds of things that Blaz and Maria just mentioned. Who is really pulling the strings? What is really going on today? When you get up higher and you start looking at a more macro view, but there aren't enough of us. We're certainly nowhere near a majority or a tipping point, that's for sure. So the way we look at things is really different than the way the average person looks at them. Maria, in Greece, how do you think? Now, you're a college professor, soon to retire. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How do you think the average person or the average student in Greece would look at this interview?
First of all, let's say that most Greeks are more aware of the American hegemony, how it works. We have been subjectified for decades from it. And so there is a little bit more critical awareness. But on the other hand, that, as Hendrik said before, it's like those of us who are out of Plato's cave. Because the point is that we were they put us in a cave and they were showing us shadows, and they were trying to tell us what to think about these shadows. And but some of us just ran away from the cave. We got out, we saw the light, and somehow we are trying to tell the others who are still in the cave and see just the representations of reality and take that as reality, how things are. So we are, of course, those who are still in the dark and those who are starting to understand a variation, some more, some less, but on the same side. It's a battle. I think that it's an obligation of those who saw the light to inform others. It's not about feeling good with ourselves. Yes, I understand. I don't need anyone to explain it to me, but also try to pull the others who still cannot see, because this is a war on us on every field, as Hendrik said, and it was the injections, it's like global warming and all the erasing agriculture to save the planet, and wars in Ukraine, wars in genocide in Gaza. There is a full spectrum of very important issues that we have to take a side on. It's not good enough to be in the middle. It's not good enough to wash your hand and say, I'm good. And so I think that we must push over and over and try to explain to other people who cannot understand what is really going on for the good of society, for the good of humanity, for the betterment of this world.
Well, I think that's what a lot of us are involved in, trying to shine the light on truth, what's really going on. For those of us, our friends who are still in the cave, as you mentioned, Maria, in the dark.
Plato's.
I'm still wondering, because I'd love to know, and I don't see anything anywhere. Blush, how do you think people in Slovenia, first of all, and maybe other countries in Western and Eastern Europe, how do you think they saw this?
They are not paying very much attention, as we would expect. At least this is my impression. We have quisling governments, all member states of European Union, and this has impact on the media and how they present things. Now, I speak to people quite a lot on different levels, and I must say that generally speaking, in Slovenia, probably to lesser extent also in Croatia, there is no hatred against the Russians. There is still respect for Russian nation, Russian statehood, Russian culture. But there are snippets. A friend of mine just said, yeah, I know, I have nothing against Russians and Putin, but it's not correct that Russia invaded Ukraine. So the problem is that people are thinking in snippets, in small samples of time, of history. And if you take just things out of context, then of course, and this is the tool of manipulation, which media are using, then general feeling of the population is really very much like it was said, mass formation took place and hypnotized and so on. So it's a very, very limited reaction by the general public. But more interestingly, the intellectuals, I have only two Slovenian academics with whom I can talk, at least partially. And one of them even wrote some excellent books criticizing social trends during the last few years. And this level is relatively more open to understanding the problem of Russia, Ukraine, and the position of Russia more objectively. Like you said, Regis, we have not yet reached the critical mass of understanding. And this maybe, as already discussed, this interview will probably have, hopefully, the strongest positive impact in the States.
Well, I sure hope so. Maria, go ahead.
Here, I remember what Putin said about when asked who did the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And so Tucker Carlson said, when he asked that, Putin said, "You did." And he said, who's you? I mean, I didn't do it. No, CIA did it, he said. And so Tucker said, "Why don't you go out and tell what happened?" And he said, "It's impossible. USA has all the media. You can't go against all the blockade of information that they control, and then they send to each and every country through Reuters, Associated Press. So what we get as information is centrally decided. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, why so many people are in the dark in Plato's cave."
Yeah, you make a good point, and Putin made it very clear. And because I guess I've been critical of what I have felt was that Russia is not even in the information wars game with America. And he made that clear, Maria. You just said it. They spend more money on that media, 2 or 3 times more than we spend on defense. And it's impossible to break through. Hendrik and I have had discussions about this over the last couple of years.
He was criticizing this since several years already.
Yeah. And so
that Russia has lost the information warfare at all. Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Which is why we're doing this show. This show.
I think it's a boy can't win. It because they control it. So how are you going to break it?
Yeah, the only way that I can look at that is there's always a way for a dandelion to break through the concrete. And the dandelion is sunshine. The dandelion is life. And I mean, without that kind of hope, none of us would be doing what we're doing. But I want to focus on something that both of you, Blaz and Maria, were talking about. And Hendrik as well, we talked about in the very beginning. Tucker came here, and what he wanted was to give the American people some concrete answers from Putin on why he invaded Ukraine. Tucker didn't come here for anything else. He didn't come to ask about Russian politics, Russian social issues or problems, Russian economic. Tucker didn't want to talk about the Russian soul. He doesn't even know what it is. He did not expect how Putin started answering his first question, and it was with the historical context. Without context, you cannot understand the current reality and how we got here. I want to go in reverse this time. Blaz. I know Tucker was surprised. 30-minute monologue, lecture from the professor about Russian history. Maria mentioned that in the beginning. Back to the 8th century. I know Tucker had to be shocked. He had to feel like he was in college again, in a graduate level class. So, Blaz, what did you think about Putin not saying, well, this is why I invaded Ukraine, but he went all the way back to the 8th century? Your thoughts, was that just a waste of time? Tucker thought it was a filibuster, but then after they talked about it, he agreed, no, I understand why he did it. Your thoughts on that, Blaz?
Okay, so long presentation of the Russian history, which was Putin's first answer was factual. I think it was probably necessary and hopefully uplifting for a wider audience, which was maybe not aware of the importance of Russian statehood and culture. But this presentation was not in the spirit of I.E. Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, meaning from the perspective of ordinary people, the majority of population. It was a correct description of tsars, tribals, leaders, and we are dealing here with a widespread phenomenon of exposing the ancient history. And I think it's a very dangerous tool for manipulating people into believing of being chosen, being historical, being better. Well, I would like to underline that history should be studied, respected, but building actual policies on some historical facts from thousands of years back is creating problems like Israel and Palestine and many others, because we see this calling for thousands of years back in many states. Many nations are ready to forget about how they are being treated by the government today and dream of 10,000 years back how great they were once in history. So I would say that the leaders of Russia, of France, of Britain, of India can be proud of long history of their nations. But more important question is, are they working on behalf of their historical nations here and now? And if I continue, because now we are already discussing the content, we have already mentioned that Putin underlined that American presidents and other Western leaders are not the actual decision makers, which is true. And we discussed that the problem is systemic. And Putin gave some concrete evidence for that. But he did not go further in explaining the decision-making structures in Russia. So let me offer my view on what was left out of this discussion. So just few important items for our lives today that were left out. Globalism, eugenics, neoliberalism, financialization, transhumanism, technocracy, humanism, constitution, rule-based versus law-based international order. These are the crucial categories which were not even mentioned explicitly. The mentioned categories, I have just here listed few, are systemic, are paradigmatic. They are defining the direction of travel of human society. Now, indirectly, Putin's comments on Elon Musk, on genetics, reveal that Putin leans towards technocracy and transhumanism, admiring Elon Musk as some sort of self-made visionary, scientist, billionaire. It was very disappointing for me. The eugenicist dynasty of Musks is part of a global deep state working towards putting chips into people's brains, operating surveillance orbital satellites, manufacturing environmentally destructive electric cars, building global ant computer, subduing and controlling the population of the world. And I think Putin failed to position correctly the doctrine of Nazism as tightly connected to eugenics. Consequently, proclaimed Russian strategic goal to denazify Ukraine is questionable. To denazify Ukraine, Russia would have to demand abolition of the mother doctrine of Nazism, which is eugenics, which is intertwined with globalism. And comments, how does Russia stands towards globalism? Another thing which I found very important is Putin's description of Orthodox Christianity as a religion that operates in a tolerant way towards other religions in Russia. I think it's true. It was this presentation was acceptable on a pragmatic level, but he left the doors open to understanding that Orthodox Christianity is some sort of Russian state religion. By the way, this would be in contradiction with the valid Russian constitution, which stipulates that the state is secular and guarantees freedom of religion, equal rights, irrespective of religious belief, and right to worship and profess one's religion. So, to be a little bit critical, in a positive way, in a constructive way, one could understand Putin's main message, much like commenting a hockey or football match. The other team is cheating, using doping, and so on, but the play as such is not questioned. So I think that Putin's positioning of the categories of war, what is war, what drives wars, of religion, of technology, of genetics, of artificial intelligence, of money, of carbon, was rather pragmatic, insufficient, fourth industrial revolution friendly. And his rehabilitation of Yeltsin is very telling and, for me, disappointing.
Blush, I appreciate that. I know Maria is sitting there chomping at the bit. She and I have talked about transhumanism, technocracy, globalism, and all of this. We can't talk about it enough. I appreciate that insight, and I think you did it in a very positive way. Maybe Putin would accept 3 or 4 or 5 of us to sit down and do an interview on these other very specific topics that are happening. And we would all love to know where President Putin is on each of them. We do know that he said Russia has to get involved in artificial intelligence. This is a very dangerous area. Without some kind of morality involved in the decision making, without some kind of government, and it's got to be some kind of universal government deciding where this is going to go, because it's, as Blush is mentioning, it's all very threatening to humanity. So I appreciate that insight, but I want to bring it back to the way that people are going to take away what Putin said in general. I know, and you're not alone, Blush, because I'm included, I would love to hear Putin talk about a lot of things, a lot of other things that were not mentioned here. But I have to agree, the scope and the purpose of this was to explain Putin's views on Ukraine and the war. That was Tucker's point for coming here. Putin knew it. And I think if Tucker could ever come back and ask Putin, what's your position, or what's your government's position on all of these other things, including digital currencies, chips in the brain, digital identification, eugenics, the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if as many people as 191 million people would want to be interested, but actually there should be billions of people in the world that should be interested in this, because Blush, and I know Maria, what's at stake is not Ukraine. It's not the genocide in Israel. It's the attack on our basic humanity, the future of who we are as humans. Maria, I'm going to send it to you, and then after that, I'll flip it over to Hendrik. However you want to conclude this, Maria.
First of all, I would like to say that, of course, it's only a 2 hours interview. And so I wouldn't like to open it too much. I would like if he had mentioned something about Gaza again. We know his position. He has mentioned that it's what is going on is unhuman, and that he supports a Palestinian state. But I would like to, if he had just one sentence to add about what's going on in Gaza. What I want to say is that he mentioned in his interview that because Tucker Carlson tried to say we are two hemispheres, one in the east and one in the west, and he said no, we are one environment. And that this is working like this in two different spheres is a problem. And only if we unite and have safety will we be able to prosper as a species. So I think his idea of how it should be is very clear. And we must also understand about the AI, robotics, and all that. As I've mentioned other times when we talk with Regis about this, you cannot jump off the race of AI and robotics because economy is going that way. You will just be left behind. The point is what use you will give to technology and robotics. Now, if you are human-centric, as it seems that Putin is, who is for the family, is for against LGBTQ transhumanism and eugenics, because that's what it is, and supporting a more family type based society. And you can use this new technology not to robotize humans, not to change what humans are, but to change production and allow more time and safety and prosperity for humans. So I think we need to see that it is also for us as a human species to demand that all these things come for our benefit and not for the 0.0001% who get together in Davos or in other institutions like Bilderberg or Trilateral Commission, or all these decision makers for us, without us, and in the dark. And I think that if we can see that potential, then maybe all this despair that people are feeling can be turned into something more positive, which is hope. And then hope can bring new battles, and we can actually claim for what is ours to begin with. So I don't want, I've been looking into these things for quite some while, and I always think that technology could actually liberate humans from exploitation of man by man. And we can use all this technology to offer humans more creativity space and time. And but we need to give the good fight for us all.
Yeah, you made a good point, and I think Putin actually finished this on a hopeful note when he talked about the brain, two hemispheres, and it's not one against the other. The right side needs the left side to solve the world's problems. He said we are one entity, and to me, and because the three of us share this, and I know Blaz does, we are all human beings. And it is us as humans who are being attacked from all sides. All of you know that Ukraine is connected to Gaza, that's connected to Syria, that's connected to Somalia, that's connected to China, that's connected to name your location anywhere in the world. And this is what we're up against. Hendrik, your turn. Final thoughts.
Yes, I think Blaz and Maria are completely right. I would easily pay money to know what Putin is thinking about all these other different topics. But I think he made it very smart in this interview. When Tucker asked about what is going on in Ukraine, he expects maybe an answer from Putin like, oh, Ukraine, violence, humanity, or whatever. But he did not go in this kind of small things. He talked about several times in this interview, I think, about the Russian soul. And he made it completely clear for Tucker and for the audience that the people of Ukraine and Russia will not be divided. They will be united after this war stops, or if there comes a new government or whatever. And I think he not only means the Russians in Ukraine, but also the Russians over the whole world, in Latvia, Litauen, and whatever, all these places where they have Russian people. So he talks a lot about Russian soul, and that is completely unexpected, or was completely unexpected for Tucker, but I think also for most of the Western audience, that you hear something about the Russian soul. What is it? You cannot measure it. In the West, we always want to have facts and measure things, but the Russian soul you cannot measure. So I think it was really smart of Putin to talk about this, because this is what is behind there. They have the same history, they have the same religion, and they have the same ideas. They are conservative, and they have the same soul. So that's why I think it was very smart of Putin to talk about that. And Tucker has not anything to answer. That was the end of the interview too. So there was no point where Tucker can come in and say, no, please tell me the facts. Because Putin goes this path. He talks about the Russian soul, and that the Russians and Ukrainians, they have this passport or that passport, but they will be united again. That was very impressive, I think.
I'm glad you're helping us end on that note. I'll let Blaz and Maria still have the last final comments, but Hendrik, you've been coming here for many, many years. You've written your books about it. You're making a video. You have a very good idea of, I think, what Russia is about. I came here for the first time in 2016 to find out the truth about Russia and the Russian people, because I didn't believe what my government and my history teachers have been teaching me my entire life. My eyes were opened immediately, and that's all I can say. My eyes were opened. I found an incredibly welcoming, warm, friendly people. I found an incredibly sophisticated, progressive, developed country. Now, I even went to the villages, a number of villages, and they're living like they were living 100 years ago, and they want no part of change. God love them. And it's wonderful they can still exist in this country, which is vast. I was amazed at the tolerance of other religions. I've seen it everywhere. I think Islam is the next largest religion. It's not a majority, but there are new mosques going up everywhere. And one right here in Crimea, it reminded me of the Vatican, how big it is, St. Peter's. And so this was the opening of my eyes to what maybe Russia was about. But since I've been living here, and I cannot claim that I understand the Russian soul, but I've felt it, because I've been exposed to the culture, the traditions, to the art, to the literature, and the history. And people who were brought up and lived through the Soviet era, through the fall of the Soviet Union. And all I can say is I felt it. And if one can stay here long enough, you can begin to feel it. And I'm not saying that I understand it, because I don't, but I have felt something incredibly special about this country. Anybody want to make any final remarks before we conclude? No?
Okay, if one should conclude in one sentence, I would say that we were discussing a very important interview, which we can firmly hope will have positive impact on better understanding of the present situation in Russia and globally, and I think this is the general conclusion. And the other topics which we have developed maybe should be handled with another time. Maybe just Maria, technology, of course, but I have analyzed questions of social governance now in several rounds, and I came to the conclusion that no technology can solve the problem of wrong social governance. In wrong social governance, even the best technologies will be by definition used to subdue people. So I think, but this deserves a special discussion.
Yes.
I have written a book on this question, and we have discussed it to a certain extent with Regis. But I think, at least my feeling is that we all agree on a humanistic approach to analyzing things and hoping for the future. Thank you.
What I would like to conclude with is that we need to be able to discuss. Freedom of speech is something that has been undermined recently. They have been calling these really ridiculous names, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. Come on now. It's because they are being threatened by the truth that they want to ban the truth and actually accuse anyone who thinks the truth and tells the truth as being against the system. So right now they are categorizing anyone who is a skeptic about how things are run as a threat to democracy. And I think that we need to understand that this is one of the greatest dangers ever to exist, because they can actually vilify you for free thought. And so I think that this is a great argument in support of what Tucker Carlson did with this interview. And I think that it's a good thing to know the other side and make your own mind, because it doesn't mean that anyone who saw the interview would agree with Putin, but at least he heard it from his own words, from his own mouth. It's not a banned discussion that only TV talk heads can talk about, and you have to believe what they say. So it's a great jump, let's say, on freedom of speech, and we must welcome it.
Let me say one last sentence, maybe something positive. When I read between the lines in this interview, I have the feeling that Putin still keeps the door open for cooperation with the West. And that is extremely positive. And I hope we are waking up soon and taking this chance and this opportunity.
I can't thank you enough. Maria, no, go ahead.
As a sub note to what Hendrik said, for the West's sake, first of all, we need cheap energy.
I can't thank you enough. This has been a very enlightening discussion, conversation. It's the name of the show, News and Conversation. You've all mentioned that this is really important, that we can at least discuss things and have these conversations without being ostracized, without being called traitors or anti-democratic. And that, I think, is really important. You know, the interview went a little bit different than I thought, but it was delightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Regis. Thank you, all of Maria.
Thank you
Hendrik.
all.
All the best.
Thank you.